My name is. I'm a teacher, and I never imagined that trust could break so easily. I remember the dawn when I first felt that wrongness in my chest, the way the pale light spilled across the creaky floorboards. The house smelled like old wood and something I couldn't name, a sort of tension hanging in the air. I stepped into the kitchen as I always did, with a mug of tea in one hand and a routine, sort of calm wrapped around me like a blanket. The table was set just the way she left it every morning, a small stack of yesterday's newspapers, her polka dot coaster, and a folded napkin next to the kettle. But that day there was an envelope, plain, unmarked, resting against the sugar bowl. I thought it was a bill, but there was something off about it. It sat too still, too quiet. My heart started to thump in a slow, measured way, like a judge counting out a verdict. I held my breath and reached for it, hands trembling without warning. A bead of sweat slid down my temple, and I thought, maybe it's a mistake. But in the split second before I opened it, I felt a rush of dread that stole the warmth from my chest. I slipped a finger under the flap and unfolded the paper. Her handwriting, so familiar, so comforting, gazed back at me. Then I saw the words, a power of attorney granting her control over my accounts, my life savings, every guarded cent I earned. My stomach lurched, and I nearly dropped the letter. The mug of tea slipped from my grip and shattered against the floor, steam curling up like a warning that now felt urgent. Not quite thinking, I sank to my knees, the shards burying into my sock, but I barely noticed. My hands fisted in my lap, knuckles white, and my breath came in ragged bursts. I felt like a child again, trembling in the dark, too afraid to cry out. Memories flickered, her singing me lullabies, soft and low, her soft hands arranging my hair in the morning before school. Each memory felt like a lie now, or maybe a half-truth I hadn't seen until that moment. I remember dragging myself to the couch, legs weak, to push the letter aside and imagine it would just disappear. But the paper lay there, a dead weight in my palm. I realized I was gasping for air, mouth dry as dust. I pressed my hand to my chest, heart rising and falling against a storm I couldn't calm. I could feel the walls closing in, each silent tick of the clock pounding in my ears. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't summon the sound. Instead, I pressed the letter against my heart, hoping for a sign this was all a dream. But the lines were too clear. There was no escaping what she had done. I crawled to the window, peering out at the empty street, just a hint of dawn, a quiet breeze rustling the leaves. It seemed so peaceful out there, like a world that would keep spinning even if mine had started to crack. I closed my eyes and tried to steady myself, counting each breath, 1, 2, 3. But the betrayal felt too deep, too raw. Love and anger tangled in my throat, each emotion clawing for space. And then I thought about Alina, my partner, my anchor, wondering if she had any idea that something like this could happen. I felt a rush of guilt for letting this moment of chaos wait for her. But first I had to face her. I slipped the envelope into my pocket, feeling the edges dig in, grounding me to the truth I couldn't ignore. I stood, body stiff, legs trembling, and took a step toward the hallway. With each step, I felt the weight shift. This moment would change everything. I wasn't sure how I would confront her, my mother, the woman who once held my entire world in the hollow of her voice. But I knew I had to find the words. The hallway stretched before me, bathed in pale light and silent witness. At the end, her door stood closed, its threshold a line between what was safe and what lay hidden. I reached out, hand hovering, and took a breath to chase away the shaking that still rattled my bones. I whispered her name, soft, uncertain, and then I turned the knob. The truth was waiting on the other side. And so was the pain. The truth was waiting on the other side. And so was the pain. I pushed the door open and saw her standing by the small armchair, shoulders hunched, as if carrying the weight of every unspoken secret. My heart thundered in my chest, wrists slick with sweat, but I forced my feet forward. "Mom," I said, voice low, ragged, like I'd run a marathon in my head before even stepping inside the room. She turned, eyes wide and haunted. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the only sound was the soft hum of the radiator and the distant creak of the old house settling. My gaze fell on the scattered papers on the coffee table, the same power of attorney letter, now half unfolded, its edges crinkled from my frantic grip. I swallowed, tasting bitterness on my tongue. "I found this," I murmured, holding up the paper. Her face flickered, shock, guilt, sorrow, all at once, like a storm passing over a field. She took a step back, as though afraid I might fling the accusation at her like a stone. But I just stood there, chest heaving, trying to steady myself. "I need to know why," I said, words tumbling out in a rush. "Why would you take control of my life, without telling me?" She closed her eyes, exhaling a breath that sounded like a confession. When she spoke, her voice was thin, almost a whisper. "I thought I was helping you, protecting you from worry." "Protecting me?" I echoed, incredulous. I felt anger curl in my stomach, hot and sharp. By stealing my choices? By deciding what I could do with my own money? My hands shook so badly I could hardly keep hold of the letter. She looked at the floor, arms folding around herself as if to hold in all the shame she felt. "The bills were piling up," she said, voice cracking. "I didn't want you to see me struggle. I was so ashamed. I thought that if I handled it myself, you could keep living the life you'd built." Her admission hit me like a fist. Shame, pride, love, they tangled into a knot in my chest. I sank into the armchair, letting the letter fall to the floor. "You didn't trust me," I said, sorrow and fury mixing in my tone. "You didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth." Tears welled in her eyes. She took a trembling step toward me, but I stayed where I was, the space between us thicker than ever. "I thought I was sparing you the pain," she whispered. "I thought I was being a good mother." I blinked back my own tears, vision blurring. A good mother doesn't hide her failures. A good mother lets you in, even when it hurts. My voice softened, though the ache in my chest remained raw. "I would have stood by you. I would have helped." She closed the distance, seating herself on the edge of the couch. Hands twisting in her lap, she looked at me through glossy eyes. "I know," she said. "I see that now. But when I see you, so strong, so independent, I felt useless. Like I was failing even at being your mother." Her confession cracked something inside me, a mixture of relief and sorrow that I hadn't known I carried. I closed my eyes, resting my head against the chair back, feeling each breath come slow and uneven. My mind replayed moments I'd overlooked, the times she'd flinched at my laughter, the evenings she'd retreat early to her room, the hush that fell over her when I asked about money. When I opened my eyes again, I saw her there, offering herself, flawed, frightened, but honest. I stood and crossed the distance, kneeling beside her. My knees sank into the carpet as I reached for her hand. Her skin was cool, trembling against mine. "I want to understand everything," I said softly. "Not so I can punish you, but so I can choose what comes next." I paused, searching her face. "Can you tell me what happened? All of it?" She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I lost my job months ago. I didn't know how to tell you. I fell behind on rent, on utilities, then the medical bills came. I was terrified you'd hate me if you saw me weak." I squeezed her hand, feeling her pulse flutter. "We'll sort it out," I whispered. "Together." A tremor ran through her, a mix of hope and fear that mirrored my own. Behind her, the soft glow of the window hinted at dawn's return, vague, uncertain, but there. I helped her to her feet and guided her to the armchair. She sat, shoulders hunched again, but this time not in shame, just tiredness. I gathered the scattered papers from the table and sat beside her. "Show me," I told her. "All of it." Outside, the sky began to lighten, as if the world was offering us a chance to start anew. But in that room, at that moment, I knew the hardest part was still ahead, uncovering every hidden debt, every secret pain, and deciding whether my forgiveness could bridge the chasm she had created. I closed my hand over hers and braced myself for the truth she would reveal. She drew a shaky breath and began to list it all: the final paycheck that never came, the rent she'd begged me not to worry about, the medical tests she'd skipped to save money, and the mounting notices now resting, unread, on the coffee table. Each secret spilled out, tumbling faster than tears could follow, and I sat on the edge of the couch, heart pounding, trying to catch each confession before it shattered. When she paused, gasping for air, I reached out, fingers brushing hers. "We'll face this together," I whispered. Her eyes flickered with both relief and shame, as though she'd been waiting to believe it. I stood and crossed to the window, pulling aside the curtain just enough to let in the pale morning light. The bills lay there in neat stacks: rent, utilities, credit notices, each one a reminder of how far she'd sunk alone. My mind raced. I thought of Alina, her steady voice when I'd called, the way she slid beside me and held my hand without a word. I needed her now, to anchor me. "Alina," I said, turning back to my mother, "I'm going to call her. We'll figure out a budget, contact the landlord, explain everything. You won't have to hide anymore." Mom nodded, shoulders slumping as if a weight had finally lifted. I grabbed my phone and dialed. Her voice was warm on the first ring. "Everything okay?" I exhaled, steadying myself. "We need help. Would you come over?" As I waited, I walked the room, gathering the scattered notices into a folder. Each ripping paper felt like reclaiming a piece of my life. When Alina arrived, she swept in with lilac-scented air and a concerned frown. I introduced her to my mother, whose eyes brimmed with gratitude. Together, we sat at the kitchen table, Alina with her laptop open, me sorting through numbers, and Mom holding herself upright in the chair. We drafted emails to the bank, set up a new account in just my name, and outlined the steps to reverse her power of attorney. Alina's calm voice kept the panic at bay, guiding us through passwords and protocols I barely understood. By the time the sun fully rose, we had a plan, a way to restore what was mine, to cover the overdue bills, and to ensure Mom never felt so alone again. I looked at her across the table, saw tears still glistening but hope flickering too, and I realized that revenge wasn't about punishment, it was about taking back control. And as our three hands hovered over that folder of papers, I felt the sharp relief of justice in the making. The morning light filtered through gauzy curtains as we gathered around the kitchen table again, the folder of bills and notices spread before us like battle plans. My mother's shoulders were straighter today, but her hands still trembled as she handed me a faded receipt. I found this in my purse," she said, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know why I kept it. I took the paper, an old parking ticket from years ago, stamped in a town I'd never visited, and felt a rush of confusion. My brow furrowed. "This is from when I was a kid," I said, heart tightening. "Mom, I don't remember you ever going there." My pulse kicked up, sharp and insistent, as if warning me that another secret lay just below the surface. Alina watched us, arms folded, but her eyes were kind, steady. She closed her laptop and leaned forward. "Maybe it's connected," she suggested gently. "Sometimes we hold on to things we don't understand until we're ready." Her calm kept the room from tipping into panic, but I could feel the air grow denser with questions. Mom bit her lip, then shook her head as if to clear a fog. She reached into her pocket and drew out a small, crumpled photo. I recognized my childhood face, grinning in front of a rusty playground swing. But behind me, half hidden, was another figure, a woman I'd never met, cradling a pair of bruised arms. The woman's eyes were fierce, determined, and something in her posture made my chest twist. "I don't know why I kept this," Mom repeated, voice cracking. Her jaw clenched, and I saw her knuckles whiten. I must have taken it before I threw it away, but I never thought you'd see it." She swallowed hard, shoulders jerking. I was scared. I felt a tremor run through me, fear and excitement tangled into a single thread. "Who is she?" I asked, throat tight. The room grew silent, even the ticking clock seemed to hold its breath. Mom's eyes filled with tears. She glanced at Alina, then back at me. "This," she said, voice low, "was your godmother. She tried to help me when I was at my lowest." After your accident. My heart froze. Accident? I'd never been in an accident. Memories flashed, nothing. My childhood had always been a blur of school lessons and bedtime stories, never hospital corridors or shattered glass. Alina reached out, placing a hand over mine. What accident? She prompted gently. Mom closed her eyes, taking a shuddering breath. You fell from the old tree in the backyard when you were 5. I blamed myself, said it was my fault for not watching you. But then I learned she was the one who saved you, rushing you to the hospital in the dark. She paid for the ambulance, kept the doctors from blaming negligence. I felt so much guilt, thinking her kindness shone a light on my failure. I promised I'd repay her somehow. Anger and pity collided inside me. You repaid her by taking my money? I whispered. My voice cracked as the realization sank in. Every clandestine payment, every odd withdrawal, had been funneled to someone I didn't even know existed. Betrayal felt too small a word. Tears brimmed in her eyes. I thought I could make it right, she sobbed. I thought if I quietly gave back what I owed, you'd forgive me without you ever knowing, without you ever seeing my shame. She bowed her head, tears tracing wet paths down her cheeks. But it never ended, and I kept adding more, until I lost track. My hands shook so violently I dropped the photo. It fluttered to the floor, landing face up, her fierce eyes staring back. I knelt to retrieve it, tracing the woman's profile. Guilt and sorrow pooled in my chest, heavier than betrayal alone. I closed my eyes, tasting salt on my lips. Alina squeezed my shoulder. We can fix this, she said softly. We can set things straight, together. Her certainty felt like a lifeline, but I hesitated, because fixing this meant confronting not just my mother's shame, but the buried guilt that had driven her. It meant deciding whether I could forgive the roots of her desperation. I stood slowly, the photo clutched in my hand. We start by closing that chapter, I said, voice steadier than I felt. No more secret payments, no more stolen trust. Then we help her godmother, whoever she is, get what she's owed. I glanced at Mom. But first, I need names, accounts, paperwork. Everything you have. She nodded, relief and fear flickering in her eyes. As she turned to gather the documents, I exhaled, feeling a hollow ache open in my chest. The path ahead would be long, uncovering every hidden debt, every unspoken debt of gratitude. But for the first time, I sensed that this current of truth might carry us somewhere better than revenge alone. And in that moment, I knew the next step, confronting the woman in the photo, the ghost of my past who had both saved and doomed us. I tucked the image into the folder of bills, closed its flap, and braced myself for the journey outward, toward a reckoning I could no longer avoid. That afternoon, I closed the folder of bills and photo into my jacket pocket and stepped outside to the weathered steps of our porch. My palms were slick with sweat, heart rattling so hard I thought someone might hear it down the street. I inhaled, tasted the cool air, and realized I was about to look up the woman who saved me, and who'd become my mother's secret debt. Alina hovered at the bottom of the stairs, concern softening her sharp eyes. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to push down the knot of panic in my throat. I'm going to call her godmother, I said, voice low. My words came out on a tremor. I need to know her name, where to find her. Alina nodded, her jaw setting in that quiet way she has when she's about to be my anchor. I'll wait here, she said, offering me water. I took the bottle with a shaky hand, grateful for the chill of it against my palm. Back in the kitchen, my mother sat at the table, surrounded by stacks of paperwork she'd compiled. She looked small, head bowed, as if the weight of every secret she'd carried had shrunk her. My chest tightened at the sight. I took a steadying breath and slid into the chair opposite her, placing the photo and bills between us. Tell me everything, I said softly. Her name, how to reach her. I need to fix what I broke. She lifted her head, eyes red-rimmed and wary. She folded her hands in her lap, fingertips brushing her skirt. Her name is Lena, she began, voice trembling. Lena Markovich. She lives in the next county, in a village near the river. She asked me never to mention her name aloud, but I can't hide it from you now. She slid a trembling piece of paper across the table, an address and a phone number, written in faded blue ink. My hand hovered over it, heart thudding like a drum. I closed my eyes for a count of 4, feeling tears threaten behind my lids. Shame, anger, relief, they tangled in my chest like roots. My throat closed, but I forced out, "Thank you." The words felt too small, but they were all I had. She exhaled, shoulders slumping as though a heavy load had finally been set down. With the address clutched in one hand, I headed for the car. My legs wobbled, and I pressed the key fob against my jeans until I heard the lock click. Alina slipped in beside me, placing a steadying hand on my knee. I darted her a glance, mouth dry. "You sure you want to come?" I asked, but her nod was firm. "I'm not letting you walk into this alone." We drove in tense silence, the engine's hum filling my ears. My mind replayed snapshots, the photograph's fierce eyes, my mother's tears, every hidden payment that had buzzed beneath normalcy. Each memory sharpened the ache in my chest. At one crossing, I almost took a wrong turn, my nerves fraying, but Alina's hand tightened over mine and I breathed, realigning the car toward the highway. The village came into view, a cluster of low houses hugged a winding river, mist curling across the water like a promise. My stomach churned. I parked near a small cottage with peeling paint and a garden of wildflowers. The address matched, Lena Markovich. My pulse thundered as we climbed the narrow path. Wet mud clung to my shoes, each step felt like crossing into a story I wasn't ready to hear. I raised my fist and knocked. The door creaked open to reveal a woman whose face was both foreign and familiar, pale skin lined with years of silent generosity, eyes as determined as in the photo. She stared at me, as though recognizing a ghost of her own making. My mouth went dry, words lodged in my throat. She stepped aside. "You must be," she began, voice catching. I nodded, mind numb. "I'm her son," I said finally, voice cracking. And my throat closed. Alina's presence beside me felt like a lifeline. "I need to, thank you," I managed. "And, to repay you." Lena's eyes filled with that same fierce gentleness, and for a moment the world held its breath. I swallowed, heart hammering. The path that began with stolen signatures had led me here, to the woman who'd saved me and shaped my mother's choices. Now I had to decide, could I exchange debt for honesty? Could I offer forgiveness in return for the truth I needed? The door closed softly behind us, sealing in the murmur of new reckoning. And as Lena led us to a small kitchen table, I realized that the hardest part wasn't finding her, it was learning to let go of the past and build something none of us dared to imagine until now. We followed Lena into a tiny kitchen, where a chipped wooden table stood beneath a single bare bulb. The air smelled faintly of herbal tea and damp earth, as if the garden outside had seeped in overnight. Lena motioned to 2 mismatched chairs and poured steaming cups, her hands steady despite the tremor I felt in my own. I folded my hands around the warm mug, waiting for my voice to come back. Alina perched on my left, her presence a quiet promise of solidarity. Lena settled opposite, gaze steady. She cleared her throat, lips pressed together, as though trying to shape the right words. "Your mother, she reached out to me many times after that night," Lena began, voice low. "She felt responsible for what happened to you." My throat clenched. I remembered blank stretches of childhood, no hospital visits, no tree accident, yet here was proof otherwise. My chest tightened so much that I thought I might not draw another breath. Lena lifted a battered tin from beneath the table and set it between us. Inside lay envelopes bulging with cash, receipts, and handwritten notes. I picked up one note, tiny script, apologetic. My mother's handwriting, again, scrawled beneath sums of money. "She never asked for help with your care," Lena said. "She insisted on doing it alone. But every time, I made sure you got what you needed." The lump in my throat stung as I traced the receipts, medication, hospital visits, therapy sessions. Each expenditure was a testament to my mother's shame, her unwillingness to admit weakness in front of me. My hands shook. I wanted to rage at her for hiding everything, yet I also felt a sorrow so deep it rooted me to the floor. My heart beat in uneven pulses, as though arguing with itself: anger, sorrow, compassion. I lifted my mug and took a sip of tea, burning my tongue, but I didn't care. I needed the heat to remind me I was still alive. Lena watched me, shoulders tense. She thought if you ever knew, you'd see her differently. She worried you'd pity her, or worse, resent her for failing. My breath caught against the weight of that thought. Pity. Resentment. Two things I never imagined feeling toward my mother, until now. Alina squeezed my hand under the table. Her eyes said, "We're here." I drew a shaky breath and let it out slowly, tasting bitterness and relief in the same exhale. "What did she owe you?" I asked Lena, voice hushed. "How much did she send you over the years?" Lena picked up a ledger, its cover frayed, and opened to the first page. She read aloud line by line, the earliest entry, months after my accident, for ambulance fees, then surgery costs, then a series of months where the numbers grew until they matched nearly everything she had saved. I felt my world shatter and reassemble with each figure. The ledger ended with a final entry just a few weeks ago: my inheritance from my grandmother, neatly diverted into Lena's hands. That discovery hit like a blow to my stomach. My grandmother's gift, meant to secure my future, had become another rung in the ladder of secrecy. I closed the ledger with a soft thud. Silence settled, thick and charged. Lena wrapped her hands around her cup, as if drawing warmth from it. I realized I had to decide what came next, whether to condemn my mother, to pull away forever, or to lean into this fractured truth and find a path forward. "I need time," I said quietly, voice raw. My muscles felt drained, as though I'd run a marathon. Lena nodded, understanding in her gaze. "Take as long as you need," she replied. "I just wanted you to have the whole story." Alina rose and came around the table, placing her hand on my shoulder. I felt tears sting behind my eyes. My mind raced through memories, both real and imagined, of the woman who had loved me and betrayed me in equal measure. I stood, pulling Lena's ledger and envelopes into a leather satchel. Each piece of paper a confession, each sum a barrier my mother had built around me. But with these truths, I held the power to reshape our relationship and reclaim my life. Lena rose too, her expression gentle but firm. "If you ever need anything," she said, "I'll be here." The words felt like a lifeline, a chance to rewrite the narrative that had driven us all to secrecy. We stepped outside into the pale afternoon light, the door closing softly behind us. Alina slipped her arm through mine, and I felt steadier, armed with truth, unsure of forgiveness but certain of one thing: would no longer be a silent witness to their guilt. The current had carried me here, to Lena's door. From now on, would navigate its waters with my eyes wide open. I climbed into the car beside Alina, the leather seats cool against my damp jacket. As the door closed behind us, the village seemed to exhale, the cottage's silhouette receding into memory. Alina turned the key and we pulled onto the narrow lane, the engine's rumble echoing off the ancient oaks. My mind felt hollow but alive, bruised by guilt, but fueled by clarity. I glanced at her profile, saw the constellations of concern in her eyes, and offered a shaky smile. She didn't answer, her fingers tightened around the steering wheel as if she were steering us through a storm only she could see. We drove in silence for several miles, broken only by the occasional drone of a passing tractor or the distant bleat of sheep. Evening light filtered through the windshield, painting the dashboard in amber shadows. I stared at the address scribbled on crumpled paper in my lap: Lena Markovich's village, the financial ledger, the envelopes of gratitude. Each item felt like a confession I had to carry. My chest tightened and I pressed a hand against it, tasting the metallic tang of adrenaline mixed with sorrow. Alina reached across and slid the paper into the glove compartment. "No more secrets," she whispered. I nodded, though I wasn't certain that applied only to my mother or to me as well. Back home, the front door stood slightly ajar, an unwelcome invitation to the past. I crossed the threshold, removing my coat and draping it over the banister. The house felt quieter than usual. Nights had carried whispers of change, but now there was only the ticking clock in the hall. My mother sat in her favorite armchair, hands folded in her lap, eyes downcast. When I stepped inside, she looked up and something flickered: hope, fear, relief. I swallowed and closed the door, the click echoing like a verdict. Alina followed and set her bag by the fireplace. I walked to the kitchen, filling a glass with water, and felt the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down. I glanced at the envelope in my pocket, its edges worn from constant handling. Somewhere within it lay the key to rebuilding trust, and to unearthing the final cost of my grandmother's gift. I caught my mother's gaze in the doorway. She looked smaller somehow, as if she'd been waiting for something I hadn't yet given her: forgiveness, perhaps, or a sign that the storm wasn't over. We gathered at the table as we had before, but the mood was different, charged with unfinished business and the promise of consequence. My mother cleared her throat, voice tentative. "I have another document," she said. Her hand trembled as she pulled a folded page from her apron pocket. "It's from your grandmother's lawyer." My heart lurched. I remembered no lawyer. I remembered her smiles, the knitted sweaters, the whispered prayers. Why would there be a lawyer? I took the paper from her and unfolded it, revealing cursive lines and an official seal. The lawyer's letter stated that my grandmother had set up a trust, with me as the sole beneficiary when I turned 30. It described conditions, a brief account of her hopes that the money would support my education, my safety, her pride in my independence. Then, in a smaller paragraph, a codicil: if I were ever to learn of the funds being used without my consent, I was entitled to a full accounting from my immediate family. The final sentence felt like a cold gale. Failure to disclose the trust constitutes a breach of duty. I looked up at my mother. Her eyes filled with tears of shame. I thought I was shielding you," she whispered. "I didn't know about the trust. I thought it was inheritance, Grandma's final gift that would appear after she was gone." Anger and pity collided in my chest, stirring a new resolve. The path to healing now lay before us, paved with documents and confessions. We needed to reconcile love with legality, compassion with accountability. I folded the letter and placed it next to Lena's ledger. "Tomorrow," I said, voice calm but steely, "we'll visit the lawyer and settle this once and for all." My mother nodded, her shoulders trembling. Alina reached out and squeezed my hand. A moment of silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken promises and the hum of the clock. When the sun rose, we would face the final reckoning. The first pale light of morning slipped through the curtains as I woke to the dull ache behind my eyes and the steady thrum in my chest. I lay there, breath shallow, feeling the weight of last night's revelation settle over me like a shroud. Alina's soft breathing beside me was a reminder that I wasn't alone, but in that half-dark, I could still taste the bitterness of what we'd uncovered. I rolled onto my side, gingerly pushing away the tangled sheets, and swung my legs over the edge of the bed. My feet hit the floor, cold and slightly damp, and I shivered, wrapping my arms around myself. The knot in my stomach tightened when I remembered the plan: visit the lawyer, demand the full accounting, sort out the trust. The thought made my hands tremble, guilt and determination warred in my gut, each breath another small battle. Downstairs, the kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. My mother sat at the table, head bowed, as if bracing for the verdict to come. When I entered, she lifted her eyes, pale, exhausted, but somehow hopeful. I set the lawyer's letter and Lena's ledger side by side in front of her. My pulse throbbed in my temples as I reached for the kettle and filled the teapot, hands still shaking. I poured boiling water into 2 cups, the steam curling up between us like a fragile bridge. Alina joined us, carrying her bag and the folder of medical receipts Lena had given us. She placed everything neatly on the table, her movements sure and deliberate. I realized how much I'd come to rely on her steadiness, her quiet confidence that we could face anything together. My mother's lips quivered. She reached out, fingertips brushing the edge of Lena's ledger. "I never meant to," she began, voice trembling so fiercely it sounded like it might break. I pressed a palm to my heart, trying to slow the pounding. "We'll get through this," I said softly, though my own voice felt brittle. "But first, we need facts." I picked up the lawyer's letter and read aloud the codicil about breach of duty. Each word echoed off the walls, heavy with consequence. My mother bowed her head, tears slipping down without her noticing. When I finished, I looked up at her. "We have to go," I told her. "Right now." I called ahead, "He'll see us this morning." She nodded, swallowing hard, as if the mere act of agreement hurt her throat. We piled into the car, Lena's notebooks and receipts in my lap, the lawyer's letter pressed against my leg. My mother's hands fidgeted in her coat pocket, fingers trembling around the crumpled photograph. Alina slid behind the wheel and started the engine. I bit my lip, trying not to let my anxiety leak out. The car lurched forward, and I gripped the edge of my seat, knuckles white. The drive felt shorter this time, the road familiar yet charged with tension. My mother stared out the window, jaw tight. Every so often, I'd catch her looking at me, eyes brimming with regret and something like pleading. My own heart ached for her, but there was no easy path back from here. When we arrived at the lawyer's office, a small building with a weathered sign, my legs felt like jelly. I stepped out first, inhaling cold air that filled my lungs with a stinging clarity. Alina came around to open my door, offering me a small, encouraging smile. My mother trailed behind, shoulders hunched as if trying to make herself smaller. Inside, the lawyer greeted us with a courteous nod and ushered us into a plain conference room. The table was cold laminate, the chairs, rigid. He folded his hands in front of him and offered water. I cleared my throat and set Lena's ledger, the receipts, and the letter on the table between us, their edges overlapping like puzzle pieces. He flipped through each document, eyes flicking up at me when he found the codicil. "Your grandmother's intent was clear," he said quietly. "She wanted transparency." I felt a rush of something, vindication, maybe, or dread, when he paused. He looked at my mother. "Your failure to disclose constitutes breach. There are legal remedies available." My mother's face drained of color. She pressed her palms into her lap so hard I thought they might bruise. I fought the impulse to launch forward, to shake her until she understood the gravity. Instead, I let the lawyer continue, outlining the steps, revocation formalities, restitution to the trust, potential penalties. Each phrase landed like a hammer blow. My throat tightened until I could barely swallow. Alina reached across and placed her hand on mine, the touch grounded me. I realized revenge wouldn't come from punitive measures alone, it would come from reclaiming what was rightfully mine and forcing honesty into our lives. When the lawyer finished, I took a deep breath and spoke, voice firm. "We'll proceed." My mother closed her eyes, a single tear escaping. I glanced at her, then at Alina, and felt a fragile resolve take root. The sun had climbed higher outside, its light too honest to hide behind. And as we left that room, I understood that the reckoning was only beginning, and that I was ready to meet it head-on. We drove away from the lawyer's office in a heavy silence, the thrum of the engine filling every gap between us. My mother sat in the back seat, hands clasped so tightly in her lap that I could almost hear her bones creaking under the strain. Alina glanced at her in the rearview mirror, then back to me. Neither of us knew what to say, words felt clumsy after the legalese we'd just endured. When we pulled into our driveway, the late afternoon light had softened, painting the porch in a pale gold. I sat in the car a moment longer, gathering myself. My heart pounded with a mixture of relief that the plan was set and dread for what came next, calling the bank, filling out revocation forms, watching my mother sign away her clandestine power. Every step would be a reminder of her betrayal and my own complicity in not asking sooner. Alina reached over and squeezed my hand. Her touch trembled, too, but steadied me more than any document could. I nodded and climbed out of the car. My mother followed, moving slowly, as though each step might crumble the ground beneath her feet. I led us inside without a word, the familiar hallways suddenly alien under the weight of what we'd learned. In the living room, I set the lawyer's letter on the coffee table and turned to face her. "Tomorrow morning," I said, voice low, "we go to the bank. We do this formally, we revoke the power of attorney and set up a new account. I'm moving my funds to an account you can't reach without my permission." My words landed in the room like stones thrown into still water. I heard the ripples in my mother's intake of breath. She swallowed, lips parting, then closing again. At last she found her voice, trembling. "I understand." The phrase sounded so small, so inadequate. I could feel heat rising in my cheeks, anger seeking an outlet, compassion dragging its feet. I took a breath to steady myself. "I'm sorry it has to be this way," I said, more to myself than to her. "But you broke my trust. I need to protect myself now." Tears welled in her eyes. She looked younger all at once, like the woman who once held me as a child, not the secret keeper I'd discovered. Her shoulders bowed, and she pressed her palms together in a silent plea. "I know," she whispered. "And I'll sign whatever you need." She glanced at Alina, who offered her a gentle nod of encouragement. Later that evening, Alina and I sat side by side on the couch, the glow of a single lamp between us. My mother had retreated to her room, shutting the door behind her with a quiet click. I stared at the empty chair where she'd been moments ago, feeling the ache of loss and the fragile stirrings of relief. Alina slipped an arm around my shoulders. "You did the right thing," she murmured, voice soft. "Now you can start healing." I closed my eyes, letting the weight of her words sink in. The battle plan was clear: bank in the morning, financial freedom, legal closure. But beneath it lay something deeper: whether I could ever trust her again, whether the love I felt would survive these wounds. My hands were cold, and I rubbed them together until the skin burned. Alina kissed the top of my head and whispered, "Tomorrow, a new day." I nodded against her warmth, drawing strength from her certainty. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves, carrying the promise of change. I didn't know if forgiveness would come tomorrow, or ever, but I knew I wasn't walking this path alone. And sometimes, that was enough. The following morning, I woke with a tight knot in my stomach and a shiver I couldn't shake. Dawn light seeped around the curtains, pale and insistent, reminding me that there was no hiding from what lay ahead. I moved through our home like a ghost, each footstep muffled against the rug, heart drumming with a strange mix of dread and relief. Alina was already in the kitchen, her silhouette steady as she filled the kettle. I could smell the coffee grounds she'd lined up on the counter, warm and familiar, but it only made the pit in my chest pulse sharper. I leaned in the doorway, arms crossed over my ribs, and watched her calm ritual. When she noticed me, she offered a small smile. "Morning," she said, voice soft and grounded. I nodded, forcing out, "Morning," though the word tasted bitter. She handed me a mug, the porcelain warm between my hands. I wrapped my fingers around it, letting the heat anchor me. Our mother appeared then, eyes red-rimmed, clutching a neat stack of forms. Each paper was stamped, lined, waiting for our signatures. She looked at me with that familiar mixture of shame and hope, as though she feared my next move would shatter whatever remained of her courage. "I've prepared everything," she murmured. "Revocation documents, new account applications, whatever you need." Her lips quivered, and I realized I had never seen her so exposed. I set my mug on the table, its rim rattling against the wood. "Let's finish this," I said, voice hollow. Together, we sat down, Alina with her reassuring calm, my mother with trembling hands, and me with a pen poised above the first document. My hand shook so violently that ink spattered onto the page. I forced myself to anchor my wrist, pressing the pen firmly and signing my name. The scratch of ink felt like pulling roots from the ground of my chest. When it was my mother's turn, she closed her eyes and exhaled slowly before placing her signature beside mine. Tears spilled from her lashes, splashing onto the paper in tiny dots. I watched her body tense, fought back the urge to look away. Instead, I reached across the table and let my fingertips brush hers, a silent acknowledgement that this act, dry, procedural, irreversible, was also a pathway toward truth. With the final form complete, I folded the papers and slipped them into an envelope addressed to the bank. Each crease felt like cement setting around the bones of our old life. I drew in a breath that felt too large for me to hold, then exhaled slowly, tasting bitterness and resolve. My mother met my eyes, and in them I saw a blend of sorrow and relief, as if she, too, sensed the freedom lurking on the other side of these signatures. Alina slipped her arm through mine as we walked out the door. Outside, the air was crisp, humming with early light and possibility. I could feel every heartbeat beneath my ribs, steady now, anchoring me to the present. At the bank, the teller accepted the envelope without comment, its weight felt in the slow slide of paper across the counter. I realized revenge had never been about punishment. It was about reclaiming my story, and building new banks on the current of truth. On the drive home, I stared out the window at trees passing in a blur. My mother sat beside me, hands folded in her lap, gaze fixed on the road ahead. I felt a curious mixture of compassion and distance, like part of my heart still recoiled at the memory of lies, while another part softened at her visible remorse. Alina reached over and squeezed my hand, and in that squeeze I felt her unwavering promise, I wasn't alone. Back at the house, sunlight poured through the windows, painting patterns on the floor that felt both bright and alien. My mother retreated to her room, closing the door with a soft click that echoed through the halls. Alina and I sat on the couch, the afternoon stretching before us. I let out a shaky laugh that ended in a sigh. I don't know if I can ever trust her again, I admitted, voice raw. Alina drew me close. Trust has to be rebuilt, she said. It won't be easy, but you'll find your way back. She pressed a hand to my cheek, warmth seeping into the chill I felt in my bones. I closed my eyes, resting my head against her shoulder, and let her steady breathing remind me that safety could exist again. Later, I wandered into the study and found the photograph of Lena, the woman who'd saved me and become the axis of our secrets. I traced her face with a fingertip, marveling at how someone could carry such fierce compassion while remaining hidden for so long. I realized that forgiveness might start here, with acknowledging the debts that tied us together, debts of care, of shame, of love. A soft ping from my phone pulled me back to the present, a notification from the bank confirming receipt of the revocation request. My stomach clenched, adrenaline rising again. I tapped the message, and the screen displayed the words I'd been waiting for, change processing. You will receive confirmation once completed. My breath caught. The current was shifting again. I slid the phone into my pocket and returned to the couch, where Alina waited. I reached for her hand, warmed by connection rather than betrayal. Whatever comes next, I said, voice firm, we face it together. She nodded, leaning her head against mine. Outside, a breeze rustled the leaves, carrying the first tremors of evening. The path we'd chosen wound into uncertain territory, but I no longer feared the unknown. I had reclaimed my life, paper by paper, confession by confession. And as the shadows lengthened, I felt the spark of something powerful, not forgetting, not erasing the past, but embracing the fragile power of truth moving forward like a river carving new banks. The afternoon sun had dipped toward the western hills by the time I found myself alone in the study, the folder of past debts tucked away in the desk drawer. The house was quiet, too quiet, and I realized how empty the rooms felt when the weight of secrecy was removed. I rested my hand on the edge of the desk, tracing the grain, and felt a kind of hollow relief. The worst was behind us, but the road ahead still stretched uncertain. Alina's voice floated down the hallway, soft and steady. She'd stayed late after dinner to review our budget plan, and I imagined her bent over spreadsheets, mapping each step toward financial stability for my mother and me. Her dedication warmed me, but also reminded me that every act of kindness had its own cost, late nights, stolen sleep, worry lines deepening around her eyes. I rose and pushed the door open to find her surrounded by papers and receipts, a single lamp illuminating her determined face. She looked up, offered me a tired smile. "How are you holding up?" she asked, gathering the last sheet into a neat stack. I shrugged, heart still pulsing with tension. "Better, I think. Clearer." I stepped inside and sank into the chair opposite her. The papers looked less like evidence now and more like tools, ladders we'd used to climb out of the pit my mother had fallen into. "Thank you," I said, voice low. "For everything." She tilted her head, brushing loose hair behind her ear. You're welcome. But we're not done. Her tone was gentle, but there was steel beneath it. Your mother needs more than finances. She needs to rebuild her life, her identity beyond being your secret keeper. Her words settled over me like a promise I wasn't sure I was ready to claim. What do you mean? I asked, leaning forward. I mean therapy, she said, sliding a business card across the desk. Family counseling. You and her, together with a professional. To untangle the shame, the guilt, the hidden fears. To help you trust her again, if that's possible, and help her find forgiveness for herself. I stared at the card, clean design, bold letters. The counselor's name sounded familiar from local listings. My stomach fluttered with a mix of hope and dread. Could I face my mother in that room again, not as teacher and student, but as fractured equals, both afraid of what the other might say? My palms grew sweaty imagining the confessions that would spill there. Alina saw my hesitation and reached across, squeezing my hand. I'll come with you, she said. You won't have to convince her alone. We'll all sit down together. I exhaled, tension loosening in my shoulders. Okay, I whispered. Let's do it. Saying the words felt like dropping stones from my chest. Even if trust could never fully return, I owed it to both of us to try. Later, I knocked on my mother's door. She answered with a cautious glance, as though expecting me to withdraw the invitation. Instead, I held out the business card. I talked to Alina. We think it might help to talk to someone, together. My voice trembled, but the offer was sincere. Would you go with us? Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I saw the fragile woman behind the mask of stoic shame. She took a trembling breath, nodded once. Yes, she said, voice small, but determined. I'll go. That night, as I lay beside Alina, I felt the current of change swirl around me. I thought of Lena, the woman who'd saved me and taught my mother lessons in humility and compassion. I thought of the lawyer's letter, the revocation forms, the banking envelope sealed and waiting to be mailed. Each step had peeled back another layer of fear. Now we were poised at the next threshold, the confession of our wounded hearts. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains in golden shafts. My mother sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She looked smaller, but somehow steadier than before. I joined her, placing my hand over hers. Alina arrived moments later with the counselor's office printed directions. We looked at each other, 3 hearts beating in tentative unison. I realized then that revenge had never been about punishment. It had always been about reclaiming our lives from the shadows of secrets. And now, as we stepped out into the soft morning light, I felt the current lift us forward, toward healing that might be bitter, but could also be unbearably sweet. The sun was just climbing higher when we pulled into the gravel parking lot beside the counseling center, its windows catching light like gentle promises. I sat in the car for a moment, hands folded in my lap, heart fluttering as if it might leap straight through my chest. Mom sat beside me, shoulders tense but squared, and Alina waited in back, giving me an encouraging nod through the rearview mirror. I pressed my fingers to my temple, breathing in and out until the dull ache behind my eyes eased just enough to reach for the door handle. Inside, the waiting room smelled faintly of lavender and paperbacks. A woman behind the reception desk looked up and smiled, warm, patient, then directed us down a quiet hallway. Our footsteps echoed softly on the linoleum, carried by hushed voices drifting from the rooms we passed. Each door was numbered but otherwise nondescript, like any house you might enter without knowing its secrets. I led the way to the 13th door on the left, if you counted from the entrance, and paused before knocking. Mom's hand found mine, her grip firm but trembling. Alina slid past us and gave her arm a reassuring squeeze. I felt my throat constrict, as though every unspoken question and accusation and apology were attempting to crowd free at once. I lifted my hand and tapped the door twice, almost afraid to make a sound. The counselor's voice came through, gentle, low, inviting us in. We stepped across the threshold together, as if crossing into a new world. The room was small but bright, a single window letting in daylight that danced across cushioned chairs arranged in a loose circle. A potted fern sat in the corner, its leaves a hopeful green. The counselor offered each of us a seat, me on the left, Mom on the right, and Alina beside me, leaning in close. We began with introductions, our names, our reason for being there, but my words felt hollow, like echoes in a cavern. Mom's quiet admission of shame carried a weight that pressed against the walls, and Alina's straightforward support grounded us both. The counselor listened, nodding, then asked us to share what brought us here beyond the forms we'd signed. I waited as Mom swallowed and began, voice wavering, describing the fear that drove her to protect me from her own weakness. I recognized the same tremor in her voice that I'd heard at home, but here it felt raw, laid bare before a stranger. My own pulse fluttered as I thought of every silent dinner, every tense morning when her eyes had betrayed a worry she never spoke aloud. When it was my turn, I drew in a shaky breath. I felt lost, I said, hands twisting in my lap. Like the ground shifted under me and I didn't know how to stand. My voice cracked, and I paused, imagining the moment she'd laid that power of attorney form in my hands. Heat flamed in my cheeks, and I clenched my fists to stop my fingers from trembling. I want to trust her again, I admitted, but I don't know if I can. The counselor leaned forward, hands open. Trust is rebuilt in steps small enough to hold, she said. Let's find one step you can take together. She invited Mom to respond, and I watched my mother's face tighten, fear, regret, longing all mingled in her expression. She reached out and covered my hand with hers, the same hand that had signed those papers without telling me. A tremor ran up my arm, and I felt tears press behind my eyelids. Alina squeezed my shoulder, and I blinked back the sting. The counselor asked us to describe something we each appreciated about the other, something specific. Silence stretched. I thought of mornings when Mom's cooking scent filled the kitchen, of the way her laugh rippled through the hall. I remember how safe I felt when she tucked me in as a kid, I said, voice low. Even now, her hands can calm me. My tone was hesitant, vulnerable, but honest. Mom's tears spilled free. And I've always been proud of you, she whispered, voice thick. You've been kind and honest, even when I wasn't. She glanced at Alina, then back at me. I admire how you face things head-on. Her words landed like gentle rain on dry earth, promising growth. The counselor guided us through an exercise in which we took turns voicing an apology and an intention, one sentence about regret, one sentence about what we hoped to do differently. Mom said, I'm sorry I kept you in the dark. I intend to tell you everything from now on, even when it scares me. I replied, I'm sorry for recoiling in anger and not letting you explain sooner. I intend to listen before I judge. Alina followed with her own intention to support us both, no matter how messy the journey. Afterward, the three of us sat quietly, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the tension between us soften. No, the breach wasn't vanished, trust takes time to heal, but we'd planted seeds today in the soil of openness and forgiveness. As the counselor closed the session, she reminded us that real change happens in the days between meetings, in every small moment when we choose truth over fear. We left the office hand in hand, the afternoon sun warming our skin. Mom exhaled, her shoulders easing. Alina slipped her arm around me, and I felt the current of our story shift, ever so slightly, towards something gentler, something hopeful. As we walked back to the car, no one spoke. And yet in that comfortable silence, I knew the next act of our lives would be written in the honest breaths we shared and the trust we dared to rebuild, step by tentative step. By the time we pulled into the driveway that afternoon, the sunset had painted the sky in bruised purples and faded golds, a quiet reminder that even the day's end could be beautiful in its own soft way. We sat in the car a moment, neither of us ready to break the fragile silence. My mother stared straight ahead, knuckles white around the steering wheel. Alina reached back and squeezed my hand, as if saying it was okay not to know exactly what came next. We walked inside together, and the house felt different, lighter, somehow, as though the weight of unspoken truths had been lifted, if only by a fraction. My mother paused in the hallway, looking over her shoulder at me. Her eyes glistened, reflecting a mixture of relief and lingering fear. I offered her a small, encouraging nod. She returned it with a shaky exhale, then headed toward the living room without another word. Later, we gathered around the coffee table, the counselor's homework spread in loose sheets, prompts for daily reflections, exercises in gratitude, and suggestions for rebuilding trust through small acts of transparency. My mother reached out and touched one of the pages, fingertips tracing the title, Moments of Honesty. She read it aloud in a whisper, as though the words were both a gift and a challenge. "You go first," I said softly, and she nodded, folding the corner of the page. "Every evening," she began, voice barely above a breath, "I will share one truth about my day, with no omissions, no secrets." Her eyes held mine, and I saw something fragile shift behind them, a resolve to change. I drew in a slow breath, feeling the tension ease from my shoulders. When it was my turn, I picked up the reflection sheet marked Gratitude for Vulnerability. "I will thank you each night for telling me something real," I said, voice trembling with sincerity. "Because I know how hard it is to be honest when you're afraid." My words hung between us like a promise, and she wiped at her cheek. Alina offered her own intention, to listen without judgment, to remind us both that we're on the same side, and we folded our sheets together, sealing them in the little journal the counselor had given us. It felt ceremonial, as though we'd buried the seeds of a new beginning. That evening, as twilight settled over our home, I found my mother in the kitchen, quietly packing her evening tea. I leaned in the doorway, watching her silhouette against the soft glow of the counter lamp. When she turned, she held up her journal. "Truth?" she asked, voice small. I crossed the room and took her hand. "I saw you hesitate back there," I said, even after the session. "And that's okay." I brushed my thumb over her knuckles. "I'm grateful you didn't hide that." Her eyes softened. She opened the journal to a blank page and wrote with a deliberate hand. Then she pushed it across the table to me. I read her line, "I was afraid to tell you I'm still in pain over what I did, but I will not hide from you again." My chest tightened and I reached across, folding the paper closed. "Thank you," I whispered. In the days that followed, our routine shifted. Evenings became a quiet ritual of sharing truths and gratitude. Sometimes the revelations were small, a confession about an overdue bill, an apology for a sharp word spoken in frustration, but other times they cut deeper, unearthing old fears and regrets. Each admission trembled on the edge of embarrassment, but we honored them, and slowly the edges of our pain softened. One night, I found a photograph tucked into the journal. My mother's cursive scrawl on the back read simply, "For when you doubt, I love you." It was a picture of us at the summer fair, both of us laughing with sticky cotton candy melting on our hands. I held it against my heart, tears blurring the colors. In that moment, I realized that revenge, if I'd ever sought it, had transformed into something unexpectedly sweet, the chance to rebuild what we'd lost. A few evenings later, Alina surprised us both with homemade cookies. We gathered in the living room, mugs steaming in our hands, and for the first time in a long while, we laughed without reservation. My mother's eyes crinkled at the corners, mine shimmered with something like relief. We spoke of everything and nothing, plans for the weekend, memories of simpler times, hopes for the future. As we sat there, I felt the current of our story shift once more. The betrayal had cut deep, but each act of honesty widened the gap between past hurt and present healing. My heart no longer feared the next confession, it welcomed it. And in that quiet glow of shared vulnerability, I understood the truth of what we'd built, a family not perfect, but fiercely committed to truth and love, however jagged the path. Outside, the night wrapped itself around the house, stars emerging one by one. I glanced at my mother and Alina, two lamps burning beside me, and felt the bittersweet sweetness settle in my chest. The road ahead might still have shadows, but we'd learned to face them together, with honesty as our compass. And that was a victory sweeter than any I could have imagined. The morning air outside hinted at autumn's approach, crisp, with the faintest rustle of turning leaves, and I woke before dawn, heart already racing. Today was different. It wasn't a session or a bank appointment, but something more ordinary, a trip to the old family lake house, where so many memories had formed before secrets fractured us. I rose quietly so as not to wake Mom or Alina, then dressed in the dim glow of the hallway light. Downstairs, I found them both in the kitchen. Mom poured coffee with deliberate slowness, and Alina loaded sandwiches into a cooler. They looked up as I entered, surprise flickering in their eyes. "You made us lunch?" I asked, smiling despite the butterflies in my stomach. Mom glanced at me, then at Alina, and shrugged. "I thought it'd be nice," she said softly. "A day away from everything." I nodded, the invitation clear. Today we would be together in a place untouched by our recent battles, hopeful that old walls might not echo with old pains. We drove in companionable silence, the car winding through golden red lanes. At the lake house, the dock stretched into still water that mirrored the sky. We unloaded our things, and Mom paused, hand on the weathered railing, gaze drifting over the glassy surface. For a moment, she looked as though she might turn away, but then she met my eyes. "It's beautiful," she whispered. I offered her a gentle smile, and together we stepped onto the dock. Alina spread a blanket on the grass and set out the cooler. The scent of pine and damp earth filled the air, anchoring us in the present. I settled beside Mom, pulling my knees to my chest, while Alina poured us each a cup of hot tea from her thermos. I lifted mine and inhaled the steam, comfort in a cup, and handed Mom hers. She accepted it with a small nod, fingers brushing mine, and I felt a warmth beyond the tea's heat. We ate sandwiches and talked about trivial things, the way the light flickered through the trees, the ducks that glided by, the squeak of the dock boards under our weight. Laughter came, quiet at first, then genuine, as Alina recalled a story from her childhood about building an impromptu raft out of pool noodles. The tension eased like mist dissolving in morning sun. When the sandwiches were gone, silence settled again, comfortable this time. I watched ripples spread across the water as Mom traced a finger in the fold of her teacup. Finally, she spoke. "I owe you both something," she said, voice steady but emotional. I turned to her, heart pounding. "I've been thinking about how you rebuilt trust, how hard you've worked to keep this promise of honesty." Alina nodded. "Every day," she added, eyes kind. Mom drew in a breath. "I want to give you something in return." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small wooden box, its lid carved with a simple flower. She opened it to reveal a delicate silver locket on a chain. "This belonged to your grandmother," she said, looking at me. "She gave it to me on the day you were born. She wanted you to have it someday." Her voice cracked. "I should have passed it to you long ago, but I was afraid you'd think I was giving you something instead of trusting you with everything." I reached out and lifted the locket, tracing the flower petals. Inside, two tiny portraits, one of my grandmother as a young woman, the other of Mom holding me as a baby. Tears pricked my eyes. "It's beautiful," I whispered. I closed the locket and set it around my neck, the chain cool against my skin. "Thank you," I choked out. It felt like more than just jewelry, it was a tangible bridge linking 3 generations, proof that love could endure despite mistakes. Mom wiped her tears. "This lake house, the locket, the days we'll share, those are the pieces of our past and our future. I want us to make new memories, untainted by secrecy." I looked at Alina, who squeezed my hand. Then I leaned into my mother and hugged her, sensing how far we'd come. When I pulled back, I met her gaze. "I want that too," I said. "And I'm sorry for doubting you." She smiled through tears, and for the first time I saw hope fully bloom in her eyes. We rose and walked to the end of the dock, side by side, 3 women bound by love, broken trust, and the hard work of rebuilding. The lake rippled beneath our feet, reflecting dawn's gold sheen. In that moment, I understood our story was far from over, but today we had forged a bond stronger than any secret. As the sun climbed higher, we looked out over the water, past the ripples, toward open horizons. And I felt, deep in my chest, that the final act was waiting, a reckoning of forgiveness and freedom, beckoning us forward into the sweetness of what we'd saved. The drive back from the lake house was hushed, the 3 of us shoulder to shoulder in the car as twilight settled over the winding road. I stared out the window at the blur of darkening pines, my fingers tracing the silver locket resting against my chest. It felt heavy with meaning, both a weight and a promise. Mom's profile glowed softly in the dashboard light, her eyes tired but peaceful. And Alina, ever my anchor, sat beside me with one hand on my knee, offering quiet solidarity. When we pulled into our driveway, the house greeted us with familiar creaks and shadows. We moved inside as if walking through a threshold of change, no longer the same walls that held secrets, but a home remade by honesty. Mom paused at the foot of the stairs, fingers brushing the banister where I'd once gripped in childhood fear. For a moment, she closed her eyes, gathering strength. I watched her, heart swelling with compassion and love that had weathered storms I never could have imagined. Upstairs, I slipped off the locket and set it on my nightstand, its petals glinting in the lamplight. Then I turned to find Mom standing in the doorway, cheeks flushed. She held out a folded envelope, cream-colored, simple. "One last thing," she said, voice soft. I unfolded it and found a letter in my grandmother's familiar script. Tears stung as I read. "My dearest grandchild. If you ever find this, know that my greatest hope was for you to live with truth in your heart. I loved your mother more than words, and I trusted her love for you would guide every choice. If mistakes were made, let forgiveness follow swiftly so that love may flourish. Always remember, our family's strength lies not in perfection but in our willingness to heal together. All my love. Grandma." My breath caught. I looked up at Mom, whose eyes glistened. "She knew," I whispered. "All along." Mom nodded, tears slipping down. "She wrote it on the day I got that locket," she explained. "She knew I'd be scared to pass it on and wanted to give you her blessing when you were ready." I folded the letter against my heart, feeling the years of hidden love and regret fold into this single moment. "Thank you," I said, voice trembling. "For trusting me with her words." I reached out and hugged her, and she held me tight, her tears damp on my hair. Later, Alina joined us on the bed, her presence a warm reassurance. We sat in a circle, three souls bound by the past but looking toward tomorrow. I read the letter aloud again, each word a balm to the wounds that had throbbed beneath our daily routines. The room felt luminous, as though Grandma herself watched over us, guiding our healing. In the following days, our routines settled into a new rhythm. Evenings were still reserved for journal entries and honest exchanges, but mornings now began with laughter and shared breakfasts. Mom started volunteering at the community center, her fear of exposure replaced by a desire to connect, no longer hiding behind pride. I returned to my classroom with a lighter heart, teaching children about stories and trust, grateful that my own story had transformed into one I could tell without shame. One afternoon, I found a note on the kitchen table, an invitation to a small gathering by the lake, just the three of us and Lena. Mom had arranged it, an olive branch extended to the woman who'd saved me and whose generosity had cost my mother so much guilt. Tears filled my eyes as I called Lena, who accepted with a joyful voice that carried across the miles. That weekend, we reunited on the same dock under a sky painted with dawn. Lena brought wildflowers, our hands intertwined as we laid them on the water's surface, watching petals drift in gentle currents. No words were needed, only the quiet understanding that love, like water, can flow through cracks and carry us forward. As the sun crested the horizon, I felt the weight of guilt and betrayal lift in soft waves. I reached for Alina's hand and then my mother's, the three of us forming a circle stronger than any secret could break. In that luminous moment, I realized revenge had never been mine to claim. Instead, I reclaimed my life through truth, forgiveness, and the enduring power of love. When I returned to the lake house later that day, alone, I pressed my palm against the weathered railing and whispered, "Thank you." A gentle breeze stirred the leaves, as if answering back. And in that whisper of wind, I knew our story would continue, not defined by the betrayals we endured, but by the compassion we chose to share.